Good evening, all, and welcome back to Dark Fears. Tonight, we journey deep into the heart of Ontario, where 10 true encounters with the unexplainable will test everything you thought you knew about what lurks in the shadows of this province. From abandoned farmhouses hiding unspeakable secrets, to lakeside properties where things that should not exist have been seen rising from the water. These are not legends passed down through generations. These are real experiences from real people who live to tell their stories. If you're new here, make sure to subscribe to Dark Fears for daily true horror content that will keep you up at night. Hit that notification bell so you never miss when the darkness calls. Now, let us step into the shadows of Ontario's most disturbing true horrors, where ordinary lives collide with extraordinary terror. Moose Creek sits deep in the northern stretch of Ontario. A small, forgotten town surrounded by miles of cold, empty wilderness. The kind of place where the roads are long, the nights are longer, and the winters feel like they never truly end. Snow settles early here, covering the landscape in a thick, heavy silence. The wind moves through the trees like a warning, sharp enough to make even locals quicken their steps. Most people who pass through Moose Creek don't stay long. The town is small, just a few streets, a handful of houses, and one old school building that has stood for nearly a century. It sits on a slight hill at the edge of town, its brick walls faded, its windows clouded with age. In the daytime, it looks tired. At night, it looks like it's watching. The school was built long before heating systems were upgraded. So even today, freezing winds slip through the cracks around the doors and windows. The hallways creak in the cold, and the lights flicker whenever the temperature drops. Most schools feel lively because of children. This one, even when full, feels strangely empty. Locals say the land around Moose Creek carries a strange kind of stillness. A silence that settles too quickly. A quiet that doesn't feel natural. And although the town survives on routine, early mornings, long shifts, quiet evenings, everyone knows that once the sun goes down, the whole place changes, especially around the old school. Because in Moose Creek, the cold isn't the only thing that moves through the halls. The janitor at Moose Creek Elementary was a quiet man named Harold. He worked the evening shift long after the classrooms emptied and the last teacher locked up for the night. He preferred it that way. No noise, no rush, just him, his mop, and the echo of his footsteps. But in that old building, silence never stayed silent for long. Most nights, Harold started on the first floor and worked his way up. The hallways were always cold, the lights always buzzing, and the wooden doors always settling with soft creaks. He was used to those sounds. They were normal. But one winter evening, while sweeping the longest hallway near the back of the school, Harold stopped. Because he heard something he had never heard before. It was a whisper. Soft, low, almost too quiet to notice, like someone breathing words directly into the cold air. At first, he thought it was the wind slipping through the cracked windows. But the whisper didn't fade. It grew clearer, forming something close to speech, though he couldn't understand the words. It drifted from the far end of the hallway, an area that should have been completely empty. Harold stood still, listening. The whispering continued. A faint, rhythmic murmur. Not a single voice. Not the wind. Something else. Something that sounded like two, maybe three voices, talking under their breath. He called out, thinking maybe a student had been left behind. No answer. He walked forward slowly, his boots echoing across the tiles. But with every step he took, the whispering slid further away, keeping its distance, always just beyond the reach of the hallway lights. When he reached the end of the corridor, The sound stopped, completely, like someone holding their breath. The hallway felt colder, the silence felt heavier, and Harold suddenly realized he wasn't alone in that building, not anymore. At the end of that long, dim hallway stood a single wooden door, room 12B. It was old, swollen from years of winter moisture, and sealed shut so tightly that no one had been able to open it in decades. Teachers joked that it was more wall than door now. Students said it led to nothing but storage and dust. But Harold knew something was wrong with that room, because every night after he heard the whispers, the knocking began. The first time it happened, he was heading back toward the exit, pushing his cleaning cart. The hallway lights flickered, and the temperature dropped fast, so fast that his breath turned white in the air. Then he heard it, a single, sharp knock. It came from behind the locked door. Harold froze. He knew no one was inside. He had checked every room earlier, and no teacher had a key to 12B. But before he could convince himself it was just the building settling, it came again. Knock, knock, knock. Slow, heavy, like a fist hitting wood just hard enough to demand attention. Harold stepped closer, clutching his flashlight. His heartbeat echoed louder than his footsteps. When he reached the door, he pressed his ear against the cold surface and listened. Nothing. The hallway went silent. He exhaled, trying to calm himself. But the moment he turned away, bang, bang, bang. 3 violent knocks shook the door so hard that the dust around the frame fell to the floor. Harold stumbled back, dropping his flashlight. It rolled across the tiles, its beam flickering wildly. No footsteps inside, no voices. Just those knocks, as if something on the other side was trying to get out. Harold backed away slowly, refusing to turn his back on the door until he reached the stairwell. And as he stepped inside and closed the metal door behind him, one final knock echoed down the hallway. Soft, almost gentle, almost patient. Whatever was behind that locked door wasn't going anywhere, and it wasn't finished. A few nights after the knocking started, Harold tried to tell himself it had all been in his head. Long shifts, freezing hallways, and old buildings could play tricks on anyone. He repeated that thought over and over as he worked. But deep down, he knew the school had changed. Or maybe something inside it had awakened. It was a Thursday night when the incident happened. The snowstorm outside was brutal, slamming against the windows and making the lights flicker nonstop. Harold was alone on the second floor, sweeping near room 12B, trying not to think too much about it. But then, the whispers returned. Soft at first, like a breeze moving through a crowded room. Then clearer, closer, like they were coming directly from the locked door. Harold stopped sweeping. The whispers fell silent. For a moment, everything was still. And then he saw it. A shadow, thin, human-shaped, slid quietly across the bottom of the door. Not from the hallway, but from inside the sealed room. The faint glow from the emergency lights created a small strip of brightness along the floor, just enough to show movement underneath. Harold blinked, thinking maybe his eyes were playing tricks on him. But another shadow appeared, and this one lingered. Tall, motionless, standing just behind the door as if listening. Harold's chest tightened. He took a step back. Then a third shadow joined it, crawling across the floor, moving in a jerky, unnatural rhythm. The two shapes merged, stretched, shifted, like something inside was pacing back and forth, searching for a way out. Harold's breath shook, because no one had opened that door in decades. No one could have, yet the shadows kept shifting, stopping only when Harold accidentally kicked his cleaning bucket. The metal clanged across the hallway. Instantly, the shadows froze. A second later, scra up. Something scraped against the inside of the door, as if nails or fingers were dragging slowly down the wood. The sound cut through the silence like a warning. Harold backed away until his shoulders hit the opposite wall. His hands trembled. The shadows didn't move again, but they didn't fade either. They waited, still, silent, watching him from the other side. That was the night Harold realized something important. Whatever lived behind that locked door wasn't staying hidden anymore. Harold never told anyone the full truth about the shadows. He didn't know how to explain it without sounding crazy. But after that night, he began writing down everything he heard and saw in the school's maintenance logbook, a thick, dusty notebook kept inside the supply closet. Every entry became darker. At first, he wrote about the whispers, then the knocking, then the shadows that moved when nothing should have been moving. And finally, the feeling that someone was following him from room to room, always just out of sight. The school staff noticed he looked exhausted, pale, jumpy, and distracted. But he brushed it off, saying it was just the long winter. No one pushed him. No one wanted to hear more about the strange old building anyway. Then, one Monday morning, Harold didn't show up. His cart was still in the hallway. His jacket was still hanging on its hook. But Harold was gone. No calls, no messages, no signs of struggle. It was as if he'd simply stepped into one of those dark hallways and never returned. When the principal went searching for answers, he opened the maintenance logbook. Harold's final entry was written in shaky, rushed handwriting, like someone trying to write quickly before something reached them. It read, "The voices aren't in the room anymore. They're calling from inside the walls." That was the last thing Harold ever wrote. The school closed for 2 days while authorities searched the building. They checked the basement, the attic, even the locked room at the end of the hall. But the door to 12B still wouldn't open. The hinges were rusted solid. The frame was untouched, and nothing inside made a sound. But the teachers who were there that morning swore they heard something strange as they walked the hallway. Something faint, something moving. A whisper, soft, distant, calling a name, not Harold's, someone else's. As if whatever lived behind that locked door just found a new voice to follow. It began as a simple weekend escape, nothing more. A young couple, Emily and Noah, both tired of city life, decided they needed a break from the noise, the screens, and the constant rush of everyday routines. They loved hiking, loved quiet places, and loved the idea of spending a few peaceful days surrounded by forest instead of concrete. Algonquin Park felt perfect. Endless green in the summer, endless white in the winter, and trails that stretched so far into the wilderness that you could walk for hours without seeing another soul. They wanted isolation, and they found it. At the far edge of the park stood an old wooden cabin, listed online as rustic, charming, and ideal for nature lovers. It sat alone at the end of a narrow dirt road, surrounded by tall pines that blocked out most of the sky. The nearest neighbor was miles away. No traffic, no noise, just nature. Exactly what they wanted. When Emily and Noah arrived, the sun was setting behind the trees, painting the sky with orange light. The cabin looked peaceful, aged but sturdy, with a small porch, a stone chimney, and a single lamp glowing in the window. But even from the outside, something felt off. The air around the cabin was unusually still. No birds calling, no rustling leaves, just a heavy silence, pressed tightly against the woods like a held breath. Inside, the cabin was cleaner than they expected. The furniture was simple, the walls made of dark cedar, and the fireplace already stacked with wood as if someone had prepared for them. But the place felt colder than it should, like the warmth couldn't settle. Emily brushed it off. "Old cabins are just like this," she said. Noah nodded, trying to ignore the faint chill that crawled up the back of his neck. They unpacked, cooked a small dinner, and planned a hike for the next day. Everything seemed normal. But as night fell over Algonquin's edge, the silence outside grew heavier. The shadows around the cabin thickened, and the forest, which had seemed so peaceful hours earlier, now felt like it was watching. Emily and Noah had wanted isolation. They just didn't know something else lived out there too. Something that didn't like visitors. The first night, Emily and Noah slept soundly, unaware of the presence that lingered just outside the cabin walls. But by the second night, the forest began to show its true nature. At exactly 3 a.m., Emily woke to the faint creak of wood. At first, she thought it was the cabin settling. Old floors do that sometimes. But then she heard it again, step by step, moving rhythmically around the outside of the cabin. Soft, deliberate, pacing. Noah stirred but didn't wake. Emily held her breath, listening. The steps circled the cabin slowly, sometimes pausing near the windows. Every so often, the sound stopped completely, leaving only silence. And then it resumed. Closer, sharper, heavier. The footsteps weren't human. At least, not in the way she expected. They were too measured, too deliberate, too quiet for someone walking in snow, yet somehow heavy enough to make the floorboards inside vibrate slightly. When she finally whispered Noah's name, the steps abruptly stopped. And for a long moment, all was silent. Then, a single knock, so soft it could have been mistaken for a branch tapping the wall, echoed against the wooden deck. By the third night, both of them were awake before 3 a.m., hearts racing. They huddled together on the bed, listening as the footsteps began again, exactly at the same time, slowly circling, stopping under the windows, then moving along the back of the cabin. They tried to convince themselves it was an animal, maybe a raccoon or a fox. But animals don't walk in perfect circles, pause to listen, and retreat silently without a sound. Something was watching. Something was moving around their cabin each night, and it seemed to know they were awake. By the end of that first week, Emily and Noah began to dread 3 a.m. more than anything else. Because every night, the footsteps returned, as predictable as the sunrise, reminding them that in the woods, they were never truly alone. On the third night, Emily woke first, sensing something pressing against the cabin. She squinted toward the window and froze. There, etched into the wooden frame and glass, were long, deep scratches, angled, sharp, and deliberate. They looked like the marks of claws, but far larger than any animal either of them had ever seen. Noah rushed over when she called him. He traced the scratches with his fingers, feeling the grooves carved deep into the wood. The marks were fresh, still damp, like they had been made just moments ago. Yet when he looked outside, the snow around the cabin was untouched. No paw prints, no footprints, no signs of any animal. The trees swayed silently, the forest still and empty. And yet the window told a different story. Something, or someone, had come close enough to reach inside. Curious, maybe even hungry. That night, they huddled together, staring out the window, listening. Every creak of the cabin, every sigh of the wind, sounded like something moving just beyond the glass. But when they finally dared to step outside at dawn, the snow remained perfect. The claw marks were the only evidence that the night had brought a visitor. Emily whispered, "It's like it knows we're watching. Like it wants us to see it." Noah didn't answer. He simply stared at the scratches, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. Whatever had left those marks, it wasn't just a wild animal. And the forest gave no warning. It was as if the claws themselves had appeared from nowhere. By the fourth night, the forest seemed to close in around the cabin. The wind had died down, leaving only a low, creeping fog that rolled through the trees like a living thing. Emily and Noah had begun to dread stepping outside, but the air inside the cabin felt stifling. They needed to check the firewood. Noah wrapped his coat tightly and stepped onto the porch. That's when he saw it. Through the thick, rolling fog, a tall, dark figure standing motionless between two pines at the edge of the clearing. At first, he thought it was a tree trunk, or maybe a shadow cast by the moonlight. But then he noticed its shape. Impossibly straight shoulders, long arms hanging unnaturally, and a stillness that felt wrong. It didn't sway with the wind. It didn't move like an animal. He froze. His breath caught in his throat. Emily joined him, her hand gripping his arm. She gasped softly. The figure hadn't moved, hadn't blinked, hadn't made a sound. It just watched. Or at least that's how it felt. Like the fog itself was alive and peering at them through that human-shaped shadow. Noah whispered, "It's just the fog. It's just a tree." But the figure shifted slightly. Not a step. Not a movement like a living being walking. Just a slight lean, like it was acknowledging their presence. The couple retreated back into the cabin, slamming the door and bolting it. Through the window, the fog thickened, and the figure disappeared as silently as it had appeared. For the rest of the night, every sound, the crackling fire, the wind brushing the roof, even the floorboards beneath them, felt amplified. And Emily could swear she saw faint shapes moving outside the windows, just beyond the reach of the porch light. Noah didn't sleep. Emily didn't sleep. And both of them knew one terrifying truth. Whatever lingered in the fog wasn't going anywhere. It was waiting, watching, silent, and closer than they ever wanted to admit. By the fifth morning, Emily and Noah could no longer ignore the feeling that something was stalking them. The fog had returned overnight, thicker than before, pressing against the windows like fingers. The claw marks on the frame seemed darker, older, as if they had multiplied. And the memory of the tall figure in the trees haunted every shadow in the room. They didn't speak much that morning. Packing their bags felt rushed, frantic. Every noise, the creak of the floorboards, the whistle of the wind through the gaps in the cabin, made them flinch. As the first rays of dawn began to pierce the fog, they stepped outside one last time. Their eyes scanned the tree line. Nothing moved, nothing visible. But both could feel it, an invisible weight, a presence lingering just beyond the tree line. Noah grabbed Emily's hand, and without another word, they ran. Down the narrow dirt road, through the fog, past the silent pines, until the cabin disappeared behind them. Their breaths came in sharp gasps. Their hearts pounded like the footsteps they had imagined following them all night. Later, when authorities were called to inspect the cabin, they found nothing. At least, nothing that could explain the claw marks, the strange sounds, or the eyewitness account of a tall figure. Still, the cabin was declared unsafe. The floors were unstable. The wiring had deteriorated. The place was left to rot, abandoned once more at the edge of Algonquin's endless forest. Emily and Noah never returned. They didn't try to tell anyone exactly what had happened, how the footsteps circled the cabin each night, how the fog seemed alive, or how they had felt eyes on them even when no one was there. Some things, they realized, were better left unspoken. The cabin remains there to this day, quiet, empty, waiting, and the forest still watches anyone who dares to step too close. Highway 11 stretches for hundreds of kilometers through northern Ontario. A ribbon of asphalt cutting through forests so dense that sunlight barely touches the ground in some areas. It's a lonely route, used mostly by long-haul truckers and travelers passing between small towns that feel worlds apart from the bustle of the city. For Matthew, a veteran truck driver with over 20 years behind the wheel, this route was routine. He knew every curve, every overpass, and every abandoned rest stop along the way. He had driven these roads through blizzards, summer storms, and endless fog. And yet, despite all his experience, something about this stretch always carried an edge of unease. The road itself is deceptively quiet. At night, the hum of tires on asphalt is often the only sound, broken only by the occasional call of an owl or the far-off roar of wildlife. Signs for gas stations and motels appear sparsely, often with long gaps in between. The darkness isn't just nightfall. It feels alive, as if the forest itself reaches closer to the road the further north you go. Matthew liked driving at night. Fewer cars, less distraction, just him, his rig, and the endless highway stretching into the blackness. But it was also when things felt different. Shadows moved differently here. Shapes appeared in the periphery of his headlights, only to vanish when he tried to focus. And sometimes, very faint, almost imperceptible, someone, or something, seemed to be walking alongside his truck, just beyond the tree line. For most drivers, these were nothing more than tricks of the eye. But Matthew knew better. He had seen enough over the years to understand that northern Ontario highways hold secrets that are older than any town along the way. Secrets that only reveal themselves to those who drive alone at night. And on one cold, windless evening, as his rig rumbled down the long stretch of highway, Matthew would discover exactly how real those secrets could be. It started subtly. On the first night, as Matthew drove past a stretch of forest near a bend in Highway 11, he thought he saw a man standing by the side of the road. He blinked, thinking it was a hitchhiker or perhaps a trick of the headlights. But by the time he slowed down, the figure had vanished. He shrugged it off and continued driving, chalking it up to exhaustion or a shadow cast by the trees. But the next night, it happened again, at the exact same spot. A tall, shadowy figure standing silently at the edge of the asphalt, motionless, just watching. Matthew adjusted his mirrors, slowed down, even tried to take a detour through the nearby side roads. But every night for an entire week, the figure appeared. Sometimes closer to the road, sometimes just in the tree line, barely visible. But it was always there, always waiting. No words, no movement, just a presence that made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Matthew started to notice other things. His headlights sometimes flickered when he approached the spot. The air inside the truck felt colder, heavier, and once he swore he saw the figure step forward just a little before retreating into the shadows. By the fifth night, Matthew stopped trying to rationalize it. The figure wasn't human, or at least not human in the way he understood it. It seemed to exist between worlds, Partly solid, partly shadow, a dark silhouette against the black forest. No one else on the highway ever noticed it. No police reports, no travelers mentioned a person standing there. But Matthew didn't need anyone else to see it. He felt it. Every night. Waiting. Watching. And with each passing evening, the shadow seemed to grow closer, more certain of his presence, as if Highway 11 itself had claimed him. By the middle of the week, the sightings escalated. Matthew had grown tense, constantly scanning the tree line as he drove. But he never expected what happened on the 7th night. It was just past midnight. The highway was empty, the wind had died, and the headlights cut through the darkness like knives. Matthew kept his eyes on the road, gripping the steering wheel tightly when he glanced into the passenger side mirror. At first, he saw nothing unusual, just the empty seat beside him. But then, a shadow appeared, a dark figure sitting perfectly still, shoulders slightly hunched, face obscured by darkness. Matthew froze. His heartbeat pounded so hard, he thought it might burst through his chest. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, just sat there, as if it had always belonged in the passenger seat. He jerked his head forward, trying to focus. When he looked back, the seat was empty. Thinking he had imagined it, he exhaled shakily. But then the mirror caught it again. The figure was closer now, unnervingly still, leaning just slightly toward him. Its face was impossible to make out, swallowed by shadow. But Matthew could feel its presence, cold, watching, patient. He slammed on the brakes, glancing into the side mirror again. The road was empty. The forest was silent. Only the reflection betrayed the truth. Something had been riding with him, just out of reach, just out of understanding. From that night on, Matthew didn't drive alone without a sense of dread. The figure no longer stayed at the edge of the road. It had found a place inside the truck itself, invisible to the eyes of anyone else, but impossible to ignore. And every time he glanced into the mirror, it was waiting. Still. Silent. Patient. Matthew had been trying to ignore the fear building inside him. But by the 8th night, something changed. The air on Highway 11 felt different. Thicker, colder, almost metallic. Even the engine noise sounded wrong, like it was echoing inside a tunnel instead of open air. He was driving the same stretch of road where the figure always appeared when the dashboard lights flickered once, then again. And suddenly, the entire truck lost power. The engine sputtered, coughed, and died. The headlights cut out. The heater shut off. The world fell into complete darkness. The truck rolled to a silent stop on the shoulder. Matthew tried the ignition. Nothing. Tried again. Dead. There was no reason for the truck to fail. No warning signs, no mechanical issues. It simply stopped. And that's when he heard it. Footsteps, slow, heavy, deliberate, crunching on the gravel outside his window. Matthew's breath froze in his throat. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. He just listened as the footsteps dragged closer and closer to the driver's side door. They didn't sound like normal footsteps. They were uneven, slightly scraping, like someone was walking with one foot heavier than the other, or like something was dragging itself forward. The sound stopped right beside the door. Silence. Then, tap, tap, tap. Something tapped on the glass. Not like a hand, not like a finger, more like a dull, hard knuckle or bone. Matthew couldn't bring himself to look. He stared straight ahead, gripping the wheel, praying the truck would start, praying the night would swallow whatever was standing outside. And then, as if responding to his fear, the footsteps moved again, circling the truck. Slow, testing, searching. He could feel it out there. He could feel its attention. And he finally understood. The figure didn't just want to be seen. It wanted him. The following morning, Highway 11 was empty and silent. The stretch where Matthew's truck had stopped showed no signs of struggle, no skid marks, no footprints, nothing. The only evidence of the previous night's terror was the abandoned truck, engine cold, and doors locked from the inside. Local police were called after a passing driver spotted the rig, sitting alone on the shoulder. When they arrived, they found Matthew slumped in the driver's seat, pale, shivering, and badly bruised. His hands had scratches, his jacket torn, and his eyes wide with fear. When the officers asked what had happened, Matthew's voice trembled. He described the shadowy figure, the footsteps, the taps on the glass, and the feeling that someone, or something, had been trying to force its way into the truck. He insisted it had been inside the vehicle at times, though invisible to anyone else. The police were skeptical. They took his statement, checked the truck, and found no signs of another person. No fingerprints beyond Matthew's. No evidence of a break-in. Nothing but a cold, empty highway and a shaken driver. Matthew was hospitalized for his injuries and exhaustion. But even in the safety of the hospital, he couldn't shake the memory of the figure in the passenger seat, the scraping footsteps circling the truck, or the cold presence that lingered just beyond reach. He never drove Highway 11 alone again. And truckers who pass that stretch late at night tell similar stories. Shadows at the edge of the road, footsteps in the gravel, and a feeling that the highway itself watches, waiting for those who dare to drive its lonely path. For Matthew, the memory of that night remains burned into his mind. Because whatever haunted Highway 11 didn't just vanish when the sun rose. It waits. Still, always. Beneath the busy streets of London, Ontario, lies a hidden world most residents never see. A network of storm drains and underground tunnels stretching for miles beneath the city. Dark, damp, and labyrinthine, these tunnels have long been the source of whispers and urban legends. Stories of people who entered and never returned, of strange shapes and sounds echoing through the narrow corridors, of eyes that glowed in the darkness, watching. It was these legends that drew a group of local teenagers one chilly autumn evening. Alex, Riley, Jordan, and Sam had grown up hearing stories about the crawling thing, a creature said to slither and skulk in the storm drains, appearing only to those foolish enough to venture too far underground. Most adults dismissed it as a myth, a tale to keep kids away from dangerous places. But the thrill of fear was irresistible. Equipped with flashlights, backpacks, and a mix of bravado and nervous laughter, the teens found an access grate at the edge of an abandoned park. The metal was old, rusted at the edges, but with a little effort, it lifted enough for them to climb down. Immediately, the air changed. Damp, musty, and heavy with the smell of stagnant water. Echoes bounced strangely off the walls. The tunnel was narrow, barely wide enough for two people to walk side by side, and every step caused a soft splash as their boots hit the shallow water pooling along the floor. At first, it was exhilarating. The thrill of trespassing, the laughter, the whispered warnings about staying together and not going too deep. But as they ventured further, the darkness grew thicker. The sound of water dripping from the ceiling became more pronounced, almost rhythmic, like a heartbeat. And somewhere, just beyond the reach of their flashlights, they felt it. The unmistakable presence of something moving. Not like a rat, not like a person. Something that didn't belong. Something that watched. By the time they reached the junction where the smaller tunnels merged into a larger passage, the air was colder, heavier, and the shadows seemed to twist unnaturally around them. The legend wasn't just a story, it was real. Or at least, something in those tunnels made it feel real. The teens were about to discover just how dangerous curiosity beneath London's streets could be, and that some creatures aren't content to stay hidden. As the teens ventured deeper into the storm drains, a strange feeling settled over them. The laughter had faded, replaced by the constant drip of water and the echo of their own footsteps. The further they went, the colder and damper the tunnels became, and the shadows seemed to move along the walls just out of the corner of their eyes. Then Alex noticed something on the floor: wet footprints. At first, he thought it was one of the group playing a joke. But the prints were too precise, too deliberate. Human-like, but longer, wider, almost clawed at the edges. They were fresh, glistening in the beam of the flashlights, and they led deeper into the underground network. Did one of you leave these? Alex whispered, his voice shaking. No one answered. The footprints continued beyond the main passage, leading into a smaller, narrower tunnel. The water pooled deeper there, turning the path slippery and uneven. Every step they took echoed loudly, but somehow, the wet footprints remained ahead of them, untouched by their passage. Riley crouched to examine them more closely. "These don't look human," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Look at the spacing, the size. It's wrong." Jordan shined his flashlight along the tunnel walls, trying to catch a glimpse of the creature that left them. Nothing. Just darkness stretching ahead, swallowing the light. Sam swallowed hard. "Maybe we should turn back," he suggested. But the prints didn't stop. They continued, luring them deeper. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Every instinct screamed to leave. Yet something about the footprints compelled them forward, pulling them toward the unseen presence. And with every step, the water grew colder. The air grew heavier. And the sense of being watched, of not being alone, grew stronger. Whatever had left those footprints wasn't just moving through the tunnels. It was waiting. For them. The further the teens followed the wet footprints, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The tunnel walls seemed to tighten around them, the ceiling dropping lower, the air turning heavier, thick enough that every breath felt like a struggle. Their flashlights flickered, their beams swallowed by the darkness ahead. Then, it happened. A voice echoed through the tunnel. At first, it sounded like Riley, soft, calling Alex's name. "Alex, come here." Alex froze mid-step. Riley was right behind him. She hadn't said a word. Everyone turned toward her. She shook her head slowly, her face pale. "That wasn't me." Before they could process it, another voice echoed from the opposite direction, Jordan's voice this time. "Guys, wait up." But Jordan was standing with them. He hadn't moved an inch. Sam swung his flashlight wildly around, the beam shaking in his trembling hand. "Stop messing around," he muttered, though his voice cracked with fear. No one was joking. No one was moving. And yet the voices continued. Sometimes they sounded like the teens, sometimes like strangers, but always distorted, too stretched, too hollow, as if someone was trying to copy human speech without understanding it. "Help me. Wait. This way. Don't leave." The echoes bounced around the tunnel, slipping between walls and water, impossible to trace. The sound seemed to come from everywhere at once, and from nowhere at all. Alex felt something deep inside him twist, a primal instinct warning him that nothing human was making those sounds. The voices had an edge to them, like they were scraped from metal or pushed through water, warping each syllable. Then one voice whispered directly behind them, impossibly close, "Turn around." They spun instantly, flashlights raised, expecting to find someone standing there. But the tunnel was empty, only darkness and the lingering echo of their own fear. The teens knew then, whatever lived in the drains didn't just watch. It listened, it learned, and it liked to play. Panic had begun to settle in the group, their nerves fraying with every distorted voice and echoing step. The tunnel narrowed even further, forcing them to walk single file. Every splash of water from their boots seemed deafening in the oppressive silence, until it was broken by another sound. Something above them. At first, it was subtle, a faint scraping like nails dragged across metal. Then the shadows above began to twist. Alex squinted, catching a pale shape moving along the ceiling. It was fast, unnaturally fast. And it wasn't walking, it was crawling. Long limbs, spindly fingers, and skin so pale it nearly glowed under the flashlight beams. Its movements were jerky, unnatural, like a predator perfectly adapted to the darkness above. The creature twisted over the beams and pipes, moving silently, smoothly, and always just out of reach. Riley screamed, shining her flashlight directly at it. The beam caught the creature for a split second. A grotesque face, mouth too wide, eyes too black, teeth glinting in the dim light. Then it vanished, crawling further ahead, around a bend in the tunnel that swallowed the light. "Run!" Jordan yelled. And they did. Their boots slapped against the wet floor as they tried to keep pace with the tunnel's twists and turns, the distorted echoes of their own voices chasing them, along with the sound of scraping above. Sam's flashlight flickered as the creature passed directly over him, so close he felt the rush of cold air from its movement. It was almost playful, almost teasing, watching them scramble like prey in a maze it had always known. Every time they looked up, it seemed to disappear, just shadows where the ceiling should have been. But then a sudden tap, or the faint sound of movement behind them, reminded them it was still there, always there. The wet footprints they had been following earlier no longer mattered. The distorted voices no longer guided them. There was only one rule now. Don't stop. Don't look up. Keep moving, or it will catch you. And the creature above? It was patient. It was fast. And it was hungry. The chaos of the crawl, the distorted voices, and the scraping above had pushed the teens into full panic. They ran blindly through the narrow tunnels, slipping in water, bumping into walls, desperate for any exit. But the storm drains weren't forgiving, and the creature wasn't patient. It struck fast. Sam, the youngest of the group, was the first to disappear. 1 second he was sprinting beside Alex, and the next, a pale, clawed hand shot down from the ceiling, grabbing him. His scream echoed, tearing through the tunnel, then abruptly cut off. Alex and the others could only watch, paralyzed with fear, as Sam was dragged into the shadows, the walls swallowing his cries. Riley tried to grab him, but another swipe caught her shoulder. She stumbled and fell, and before Alex or Jordan could react, she too was pulled into the darkness, screaming. Their shouts faded almost immediately, leaving a chilling silence behind. Jordan, desperate, pushed forward blindly, but he tripped over a jagged pipe, hitting the ground hard. He barely had time to cry out before the creature's pale limbs wrapped around him and dragged him into the tunnel ahead. Alex was the only one left. Heart pounding, lungs burning, adrenaline surging, he forced himself to keep moving. Every turn, every step, every splash of water brought him closer to a small grate they had passed earlier, the one that led back to the city streets. He reached it, clawed at it, and somehow, miraculously, he managed to lift it just enough to squeeze through. Gasping, soaked, and shaking uncontrollably, he crawled into the open air, leaving the underground nightmare behind. When police and rescue teams later questioned him, Alex could barely speak. They were dragged away screaming, he said, his voice trembling. It was fast, pale, and it didn't make a sound except their screams. I don't know how I got out. I just ran. The storm drains were sealed after that night, marked with warnings for anyone who might consider entering. But Alex never forgot what lurked beneath London. The wet footprints, the distorted voices, the crawling thing. And he never went near the drains again. Because some tunnels, some creatures, are meant to stay in the dark. On a rainy evening in Thunder Bay, Liam was driving late after a long day on the road. The streets were slick, the clouds low and gray, and the headlights of passing cars blurred against the drizzle. He wasn't looking for luxury, just a safe place to rest for the night. That's when he spotted it, a small roadside motel with a flickering neon sign. Vacancy, it read in faded red letters. The building looked old, worn, but it promised shelter from the storm. Quiet, cheap, exactly what he needed. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of mildew and cigarette smoke. The clerk barely looked up as Liam requested a room. He offered room 209. It was nothing special, just a bed, a nightstand, and a flickering overhead light. But for Liam, it was enough. He paid in cash, grabbed his key, and headed to the second floor. The hallway leading to room 209 was dimly lit, the carpet stained and threadbare. The air felt heavier as he walked, warmer somehow, like the hallway itself was pressing against him. The rain outside pounded harder against the roof, echoing in the empty corridor. When Liam finally reached the door to room 209, he paused for a moment. Something felt off. The wood was scratched, the lock looked old, and a faint, unpleasant odor seeped from the crack beneath the door. But he shrugged it off, blaming the age of the building and the storm outside. He unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was small, dim, and cold despite the heater hissing in the corner. A single bed, a small dresser, a cracked mirror on the wall. Everything seemed normal. But the moment he closed the door, Liam felt it. A prickling sensation, like being watched from every corner of the room at once. He shook his head. Tired from the long drive, he told himself it was just his imagination. A cheap motel, a long day, a storm raging outside. Nothing more. But as he unpacked his bag and set down his keys, the feeling intensified. The room wasn't just empty, it was waiting. And room 209 had plans Liam could never have imagined. The first evening in room 209 seemed uneventful. Liam unpacked, showered, and tried to settle in. The rain outside pattered steadily against the window, a monotonous rhythm that should have been soothing. But as night fell, the atmosphere in the room began to change. Around midnight, a foul, rotten smell filled the small space. Liam wrinkled his nose, searching for a source. The trash can was empty. The bathroom drain smelled normal. Even the carpet and linens seemed untouched. Yet the stench persisted, thick and clinging, like decay trapped inside the walls themselves. He opened the window, hoping the night air would help, but the smell didn't dissipate. It seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere. Each inhale was like swallowing something dead, sharp and acidic. At first, he told himself it was imagination or fatigue after hours of driving. But then he noticed a pattern. The smell always appeared at night. It didn't matter if he left the lights on, opened the door, or ran the heater. As soon as darkness fully claimed the room, the odor returned. Liam tried to ignore it, covering his nose with a blanket, keeping the fan on and turning the heat up. Nothing worked. The rotten stench clung to him, seeping into his clothes, into his hair, and into the corners of the room. It wasn't just unpleasant, it was threatening. The air in room 209 seemed alive, pressing down, suffocating. Every breath reminded Liam that he wasn't truly alone. Something unseen had claimed the night, and it had chosen room 209 as its hunting ground. Around 1 a.m., Liam had been lying on the bed, trying to block out the foul odor and the oppressive weight of the room. That's when he heard it. A faint creak, almost imperceptible, coming from the corner where the small closet stood. He froze. At first, he told himself it was just the building settling, old wood reacting to the cold night air. But the sound came again. Louder this time, slow, deliberate, and unmistakably the opening of a door. Liam's heart hammered as he turned his flashlight toward the closet. The beam fell on the door, slightly ajar, but he hadn't opened it. He swallowed hard and stepped closer. The farther the light reached into the dark interior, the more he realized he wasn't alone. A figure crouched in the shadows, motionless, pale, shadowed, and impossibly still, its face obscured in the blackness of the closet. Liam could barely make out long, thin arms and a distorted silhouette that didn't quite look human. He blinked, and it seemed to lean slightly forward, as if acknowledging his presence. The air grew colder. The stench of decay intensified, suffocating, pressing against him like a living force. Liam stumbled back, tripping over his suitcase, and the figure didn't move. It simply waited, patient, silent, and hungry. For a long moment, he considered calling for help, but the oppressive atmosphere of room 209 crushed the thought. He realized, with growing dread, that nothing outside would understand what was happening here. And the closet? It wasn't just a piece of furniture. It was a doorway. Moments after seeing the dark figure in the closet, Liam felt an unnatural chill sweep through room 209. At first, he thought it was just the old heater failing, but the cold was different. Sharp, penetrating. It wrapped around him like icy fingers, sinking into his bones. He exhaled and froze. His breath formed a visible mist in front of his face, curling and twisting unnaturally in the dim light. The temperature had dropped so suddenly that the warmth of the blanket and his jacket did nothing. Then came the whispers. At first, faint and indistinct, like wind rustling through the trees. But as the cold deepened, they grew louder. Low, hissing voices that seemed to echo from every corner of the room at once. Liam couldn't make out the words at first, only the tone, mocking, patient, and threatening. Stay. Don't leave. Join us. The whispers shifted, sounding like multiple voices speaking in overlapping tones. Some high, some guttural, some almost like distorted imitations of Liam's own voice. The cold seemed to intensify with every syllable, pressing closer, suffocating. He stumbled back from the closet, tripping over furniture, shaking, heart racing. The shadows in the corners seemed to stretch toward him, reaching along the floor and walls like black tendrils. Every movement of the air, every flicker of the light, made the whispers sharper, closer, almost tangible. For the first time, Liam realized room 209 wasn't just haunted. It was alive, a hostile, malevolent presence that fed on fear, freezing the air, amplifying the terror, and whispering promises of something far worse than death. And the worst part? He wasn't sure the room would ever let him leave. By the early hours of the morning, Liam had reached his limit. The cold, the whispers, the figure in the closet. It had become unbearable. He packed his belongings hastily, every creak of the floor and flicker of the light making him jump. The motel room no longer felt safe. It felt like a trap. As soon as he stepped into the lobby, soaked in sweat and shaking, he demanded to speak with the owner. Breathless, he recounted what had happened in room 209. The stench, the ice-cold air, the whispers, the figure. His voice trembled as he described the unnatural fear that had gripped him through the night. The owner paused, a strange, unreadable expression crossing his face. After a long silence, he finally spoke. "Room 209, he said slowly. "Son, that room hasn't been rented in years. We sealed it off after incidents. No one stayed there since. Why did you go in?" Liam felt the blood drain from his face. I didn't know," he stammered. "The clerk gave me the key." The owner shook his head. "That key, it shouldn't exist. That room, it's not supposed to be used. No one ever leaves it unchanged." Panic surged through Liam. Every memory of the night, the crawling figure, the whispers, the freezing cold, suddenly felt far more real and far more dangerous. He realized he had escaped by sheer luck, that the room had allowed him to survive. But only barely. He paid for a different room across town and left immediately. He didn't sleep that day. He didn't return for weeks. And even now, whenever he recalls room 209, he shivers. Because some doors are closed for a reason, and some rooms are better left empty forever. In the heart of southwestern Ontario, nestled among rolling fields and dense patches of forest, stood an old farmhouse. Weathered and creaking, it looked like something out of a postcard. Wide porches, wooden shutters, and large windows reflecting the morning sun. To most, it was charming. To the Wilson family, it was a fresh start. Tom and Sarah Wilson, along with their 2 children, had been searching for a quiet place to escape the chaos of city life. When they discovered the farmhouse, abandoned for years yet surprisingly well kept, they saw opportunity, a chance to reconnect as a family, to enjoy peace and privacy, and to live closer to the land. The first days were idyllic. The children ran through the fields, chasing rabbits and laughing in the wind. Tom and Sarah unpacked, cleaned, and restored parts of the house, delighted by the rustic charm and the sense of space that the city could never provide. But even on the first evening, subtle oddities began to make themselves known. The windows, large and numerous, seemed almost too clean for a house abandoned for so long. Sometimes, the reflection in the glass didn't quite match reality. Shadows that shouldn't have been there. Shapes moving in ways that made no sense. At first, Tom dismissed it as fatigue. Sarah thought it was the angle of the setting sun. Even the children noticed things, whispers of movement behind the glass, their own reflections delayed by a fraction of a second, as if the windows were observing them, not just reflecting them. The farmhouse was quiet. Too quiet. No neighbors for miles, no passing cars, just the distant sounds of wildlife and the wind through the fields. And yet, the family couldn't shake the feeling that every time they looked at a window, the house was looking back. What they didn't realize was that the windows weren't merely panes of glass. They were silent witnesses. And some witnesses never forget. Within the first week, the Wilsons began noticing something unnerving about the farmhouse. It wasn't creaking floors, drafty corners, or the occasional scurrying of animals. It was the windows. At first, it was subtle. Sarah would glance up while cooking and catch a glimpse of a shadow moving across a pane, only to realize no one was outside. Tom sometimes felt a strange pressure when sitting near the living room window, as if invisible eyes were tracking his every move. The children complained too, whispering that the windows stared at them when they played in the yard. Even when the family was alone inside, the sensation persisted. The reflections in the glass seemed slightly delayed, shadows slightly out of place, corners darker than they should have been. Sometimes, when they turned their backs, it felt as though the windows were following them, tracking their movements with an intelligence that made no sense. Sarah tried to rationalize it. "It's just the light," she told herself. Tom assumed it was fatigue and stress, but the children, unburdened by adult logic, refused to ignore it. They grew wary of standing too close to the panes, whispering to each other about eyes behind the glass that weren't their own. Even at night, when the house was silent and the moonlight spilled over the fields, the feeling didn't fade. Every flicker of light across the window, every reflection, seemed purposeful. Like the house itself was alive, silently observing, silently judging. The Wilsons were beginning to realize something terrifying. These weren't ordinary windows. They didn't just let light in. They watched. And the more the family noticed, the more the farmhouse made it clear it was always watching back. It didn't take long before the Wilsons realized that the reflections in the windows weren't behaving as they should. One evening, Sarah was folding laundry near the living room window. She caught a reflection of her husband standing behind her, except Tom was in the kitchen, nowhere near the window. Her breath caught. She spun around. The kitchen was empty. The reflection, however, remained. It wasn't just Tom. It was a shadowed, twisted figure, standing perfectly still watching her. Tom noticed it too. While reading in the parlor, he glanced at the window across from him and saw his own reflection. But behind it, a tall, dark silhouette loomed. He froze, staring at it, and the figure mimicked his movements almost exactly, yet it wasn't him. The children, previously playful and fearless, now whispered in fear whenever near a window. Sometimes their reflections smiled when they didn't. Sometimes the images moved slightly before they did, as though the windows were anticipating their actions. It was subtle at first, an extra shadow here, a shift in the corner of a pane there. But soon, the distortions became undeniable. The figures were not mere tricks of light. They were watching, waiting, and existing just behind the glass, close enough to make the family's skin crawl. Sarah tried to pull the curtains, to block the windows entirely. But even then, in the darkened room, the reflections found a way. In every glint of light, every faint shine of the glass, the family saw shapes, figures that shouldn't exist. The Wilsons began to understand the terrifying truth. The windows weren't just passive observers. They were portals. Portals that could hold shadows, figures, and perhaps something that wanted to step through. One night, the Wilsons were abruptly awakened by an eerie scraping sound echoing through the farmhouse. At first, it was faint, almost like tree branches brushing against the windows in the wind. But the scraping grew louder, deliberate, rhythmic, and all around the house. Tom rushed to the living room window and froze. Every window he could see was being scratched simultaneously. Long, deep marks raked across the glass, leaving jagged lines etched into the surface. The sound was deafening inside, a harsh screech that made the hairs on their arms stand on end. Sarah peered out a side window and saw nothing. No branches, no animals, no human presence. The scratches seemed to appear as if by some unseen force, moving with precision, deliberate intent. The children cowered under the covers, whispering that the windows themselves were attacking. The scratching continued for what felt like hours, though it could have been minutes. Every time the family thought it had stopped, it would resume, sometimes at a different window, sometimes louder, closer, as if the house were circling them with invisible claws. By morning, the windows bore long, jagged scars. And yet, when the family attempted to inspect the outside, the lawn was empty. No footprints, no ladders, no signs of human intrusion. Only the chilling marks on the glass, evidence of something unseen. The Wilsons began to understand that this farmhouse wasn't simply haunted. The windows weren't passive. They could strike, they could reach, and they could terrify with a precision that no human hand could match. And that night, the house had made its presence undeniable. It wasn't just watching anymore, it was taking action. After the night of relentless scratching, the Wilson family had reached their breaking point. Sleep became impossible. Every shadow, every reflection, every glance at the windows brought a fresh wave of terror. The farmhouse was no longer a home. It was a predator, patient, watchful, and relentless. Without hesitation, they packed only the essentials and fled, leaving behind furniture, belongings, and years of hopes tied to the property. They didn't look back, driving away as the wind whispered through the empty fields, carrying with it the faint sound of scraping, like distant claws on glass. Neighbors who later visited the farmhouse reported an eerie silence around it. The windows, though scarred, gleamed unnaturally in the sun, reflecting shapes that seemed to move even when no one was there. Local real estate agents tried to list the property, but no one would buy it. Visitors complained of unease, shadows in the corners of rooms, and the sensation of being watched. Over time, the house remained empty, unsold, and increasingly notorious among locals. Stories spread. The windows watched. They reflected more than mere images, and anyone brave or foolish enough to stay inside would feel their presence keenly. For the Wilsons, the farmhouse was a nightmare they narrowly escaped. But for those who passed the overgrown path leading to the property, the darkened windows seemed alive, silently waiting for the next family to look inside, and realize too late that some houses never forget. Just outside Hamilton, hidden behind overgrown weeds and crumbling fences, sits an asylum abandoned for decades. The building looms like a monument to forgotten suffering, its brick walls cracked, windows shattered, and doors hanging loosely on rusted hinges. Locals avoid it, whispering tales of past horrors, unexplained screams, and shadowy figures glimpsed in broken windows. Drawn by curiosity and thrill, a group of urban explorers, Mike, Jenna, Chris, and Leah, decided to investigate one overcast afternoon. Equipped with flashlights, cameras, and backpacks, they squeezed through a gap in the fence, stepping into the courtyard where weeds clawed at the asphalt and graffiti covered the walls. Inside, the asylum was a time capsule of neglect. Rusted wheelchairs, overturned gurneys, and broken medical equipment littered the hallways. Stale air clung to their lungs, heavy with dust, decay, and something unidentifiable. A metallic tang mixed with the faint scent of mold and rot. The group whispered nervously as they explored, their footsteps echoing unnaturally through the long, empty corridors. Each room told a story of abandonment. Padded cells with torn walls, hallways lined with lockers whose doors creaked when disturbed, and scattered medical charts yellowed with age. It was thrilling, terrifying, and oppressive all at once. The asylum seemed alive, listening, waiting. The rusted tools, once instruments of care or control, now sat as silent witnesses to decades of misery, reflecting the explorers' flashlight beams with a dull, cold glint. Even the bravest of the group couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't alone. The air felt charged, almost electric, as if the building itself remembered the anguish of those who had once been trapped within. This was more than urban exploration. This was walking into a place where the past still lingered, and where some memories never rest. As the explorers ventured deeper into the asylum, curiosity mixed with unease. Chris, eager to document their adventure, turned on a small digital voice recorder, intending to capture their own commentary and any ambient sounds. The group joked nervously, trying to lighten the oppressive atmosphere. But even their laughter echoed oddly through the empty halls. Later, when they reviewed the recording, their casual smiles vanished. The recorder had captured something they never heard while inside. High-pitched screams, agonized, panicked, and piercing, echoed throughout the tape. Some were faint, some closer, as if coming from nearby rooms. But the most disturbing part? The screams didn't match anything they experienced in real time. At no point during their exploration had anyone shouted, fallen, or even made a sound resembling terror. Yet the recorder picked up voices, desperate and raw, layered over the quiet hum of the abandoned building. Jenna shivered as she listened to the playback. That wasn't happening while we were there, she whispered. It's like it was already in the building, waiting to be recorded. The tape revealed more than screams. Faint footsteps shuffled through empty corridors, whispers of names, doors creaking open and shut, even faint sobs, all imperceptible when the group had walked those same halls. It became clear that the asylum wasn't just empty. It retained echoes of the past, memories of pain and suffering, replaying themselves to anyone who dared enter. The building had a voice, and for a brief moment, the explorers had heard it. Every scream, every whisper, every sound captured was a reminder. Some places hold on to their horrors, long after the last person has left. And this asylum, it never let them go. After reviewing the recorder, tension hung thick in the air. The explorers tried to shake off the unease as they continued through the asylum's darkened corridors. But the building had other plans. In a long, narrow hallway, Mike spotted an old wheelchair tucked against the wall. Rusted wheels, cracked leather seat, and a frame bent by years of neglect. It looked completely harmless. He nudged it jokingly, laughing nervously. Bet it doesn't even roll. But it did. Slowly, almost deliberately, the wheelchair began to move on its own. At first, it rolled just a few inches. The explorers froze, hearts pounding. Then it picked up speed, gliding smoothly across the cracked floor, heading directly toward them. "Step back," Jenna shouted, stumbling over debris. The chair seemed to sense their fear, rolling faster, the wheels squealing faintly as if protesting. Chris swung his flashlight toward it, the beam catching the seat, empty, yet somehow alive. Leah screamed as the wheelchair stopped abruptly just inches from them, tilting slightly as if testing the boundaries of its space. The air grew colder, and the faint creak of the asylum seemed to grow louder, echoing the sound of the rolling chair. For a moment, they couldn't move. The building's silence pressed down on them, heavy and suffocating, broken only by the echo of the wheelchair's wheels grinding against the floor. Then, Mike grabbed Leah's arm and yelled, "Move, now!" They sprinted down the hall, the wheelchair remaining in the shadows behind them. When they looked back, it had stopped. But the sense of being watched, of the asylum itself tracking them, never left. In that moment, it became painfully clear. The forgotten asylum wasn't just a place of echoes. It was inhabited by memories, by shadows, and by objects that could move with intention. And nothing inside wanted them to leave. Driven by equal parts fear and morbid curiosity, the explorers descended into the asylum's basement. The stairs creaked beneath their weight, the air growing colder and heavier with every step. Damp stone walls closed in around them, and the faint smell of rust and decay hung thick, making every breath a challenge. At the bottom, they stumbled into a long, narrow corridor lined with metal racks. Their flashlights illuminated rows of patient uniforms, threadbare, yellowed with age, and smelling faintly of mildew. Shirts, pants, and dresses hung in meticulous order, as if the patients had just stepped out moments ago. Some had small stains, faded and indistinct, yet strangely unsettling. Chris whispered, voice trembling, Who keeps all these?" Before anyone could answer, Leah noticed a door at the far end of the hallway. Unlike the others, it was solid and heavily padlocked. The wood was worn, the metal rusted, but the lock looked newer, almost out of place among the decay. They approached cautiously, flashlights sweeping over the surface. Through the small gap between door and frame, a faint light flickered from within. And then, a sound, a low, guttural groan, muffled but unmistakable, reverberated from behind the door. It wasn't human, or at least not entirely. Something breathed, something alive, or something that had been alive, pacing just out of reach. The explorers backed away slowly, hearts racing, understanding that this locked room held secrets the asylum didn't want revealed. They didn't linger. But the image of those patient uniforms, so orderly and yet so haunting, and the locked door concealing an unknown presence, stayed with them. The basement wasn't just storage. It was a shrine to forgotten lives, and to horrors the world was never meant to see. After their terrifying descent into the basement, the group decided it was time to leave. The weight of what they had witnessed, the recorder's screams, the moving wheelchair, the patient uniforms, and the locked room, pressed on them like a living thing. They exited the asylum cautiously, one glance over their shoulders at the broken windows and crumbling facade, each feeling the building's cold, watchful presence. Once outside, the rain had stopped, but a chilling silence enveloped the property, as if the asylum itself had exhaled, watching them flee. In the days and weeks that followed, the group tried to return to normal life. Jenna and Leah spoke about the experience cautiously, almost in disbelief, sharing details only in hushed tones. Chris shook it off as fear and adrenaline, but Mike was different. He couldn't sleep. Nightmares consumed him, replaying the asylum's horrors in vivid, inescapable detail. Shadows crawled across his bedroom walls, whispers filled empty hallways, and in every reflective surface, he saw figures from the basement staring back at him. He stopped leaving the house alone, stopped answering calls, stopped living. Friends tried to help, but nothing reached him. Every mention of the asylum, every photo or story, triggered panic attacks and near hallucinatory episodes. For Mike, the horrors of that forgotten asylum didn't stay behind in Hamilton. They followed him home, a permanent imprint on his mind. The others moved on, but one truth remained clear. Some places leave marks you can never erase, and some explorers never truly escape. Lake Superior is known for its beauty, its vastness, and its cold, unforgiving depths. But beneath the glassy surface lies a world few dare to explore. Sunken ships, forgotten cargo, and secrets preserved in icy darkness. Ethan Marshall was an experienced diver, respected for his skill and knowledge of the lake's many hidden wrecks. Years of exploration had taken him to submerged freighters, wooden schooners, and steel vessels swallowed by the deep. He had faced frigid currents, limited visibility, and the eerie silence of underwater tombs. Nothing had ever scared him. Until one fateful dive. On a crisp autumn morning, Ethan prepared for a solo expedition to a wreck he had recently discovered. A freighter lost during a violent storm decades ago. The coordinates promised untouched areas, unexplored compartments, and history preserved beneath layers of silt. He suited up, checked his equipment meticulously, and slipped into the icy water. As he descended, the surface light dimmed, filtered through hundreds of feet of cold, murky water. His flashlight pierced the darkness, revealing the contours of the freighter: barnacle-covered hull, broken masts, and gaping openings leading into unknown chambers. For hours, he navigated the wreck, cataloging damage, photographing rusted decks, and examining cargo holds. Everything was as expected: silent, haunting, yet tangible. But as he ventured deeper into the ship's lower compartments, the lake seemed to change around him. The currents grew stronger, the water darker, and a low, almost imperceptible hum began to fill his helmet's communication system. He paused, scanning the wreck, and realized the silence he'd always relied on was gone. Something was down there with him. Ethan had trained for emergencies, for disorientation, for low oxygen, but nothing could have prepared him for the feeling of being watched by the lake itself. Every shadow seemed to move independently. Every beam of light revealed shapes that weren't there before. He pressed forward, determined to explore, unaware that the true danger of Lake Superior wasn't the depth, the cold, or the wreck. It was what had been waiting for him, hidden in the eternal darkness beneath. As Ethan navigated the lower decks of the freighter, a strange sensation gripped him. A weight in the water that seemed unnatural, almost magnetic, pulling his attention downward. At first, he thought it was a trick of light, a shadow cast by the wreck or silt stirred from the lake floor. Then he saw it. A dark shape moved beneath him, massive and humanoid. Its outline was unmistakable: broad shoulders, long limbs, and a head that seemed to tilt and watch him, even in the murky, ice-cold water. It glided silently, effortlessly beneath the wreck, following his every move without hesitation. Ethan froze, heart hammering inside his suit. He trained himself to remain calm under pressure, but nothing in his experience could explain what he was seeing. The figure didn't behave like a fish, a sturgeon, or any known creature of the lake. It moved with purpose, circling beneath him, always staying just out of reach, yet somehow impossibly close. He shined his flashlight downward, trying to illuminate the shape. The beam revealed a pale, humanoid form, smooth and slick like polished stone, with limbs far too long to be human. Its eyes, if they could be called eyes, glowed faintly, reflecting the beam with an unnatural intelligence. Every instinct screamed at him to ascend, to get out of the water immediately, but the wreck held him in its maze-like grip. The figure moved with him, silent, patient, inhumanly strong, as if aware of every flick of his fins, every turn he made. For the first time in decades of diving, Ethan felt completely powerless. The lake, the depth, the wreck, they were secondary. This presence lurking beneath him was alive, watching and waiting. And it didn't seem ready to let him leave. Ethan had brought an underwater camera to document the wreck, a habit for every dive, both for research and protection. As he continued exploring, he aimed the camera downward to capture the lower compartments. But then, without warning, the device began to shake violently in his hands. The water was calm. His grip was steady. Nothing should have caused this, Through the lens, the horrifying truth became undeniable. The dark figure beneath him was reaching upward, its elongated arms stretched with unnatural length, the pale, humanoid form moving with strength and precision that defied the limits of any known creature. Its hands, or what resembled hands, extended toward Ethan, brushing past broken beams and railings as if testing the air around him. The camera caught the scene in stark clarity, a massive, shadowy silhouette moving deliberately, aware of Ethan's presence, aware of every flick of his fins. It wasn't a random drift or a current. It was stalking him. Every frame of the recording trembled as Ethan fought to stabilize it, his own panic reflected in the wavering video. In the dim glow of his flashlight, the creature's face, or mask of one, was partially visible, smooth and expressionless, yet brimming with intelligence and malevolence. Its upward reach seemed endless, as if the lake itself had lent it power, drawing it closer to him with silent determination. Ethan's mind raced. Every thought screamed for escape, yet the wreck's twisting passages slowed him down. The footage was no longer a record of exploration. It was a warning, documenting something ancient, patient, and utterly predatory. And in every frame, the question remained: would the figure allow him to leave the lake alive? Or was it already too late? Ethan swam frantically through the wreck, flashlight and camera trembling in his hands. The massive dark shape beneath him followed, silent and relentless, gliding with terrifying precision. Every instinct screamed at him to ascend, but as he kicked toward the surface, a sudden, inexplicable pressure slammed against his chest. The world went black. When he came to, Ethan was floating near the wreck's upper deck. His tank was nearly empty, his body shivering violently from the cold, and his mind raced, trying to piece together what had happened. The camera was clutched loosely in his hand, still recording, but he had no memory of how he got from the lower compartments to the upper deck. The lost minutes were a void in his consciousness. Time erased as if the lake itself had claimed them. Panic surged as he reviewed the camera footage. The playback revealed horrifying glimpses of what he couldn't remember. Fleeting shadows, sudden movements beneath him, and a blur of the dark humanoid figure stretching impossibly close, its hands reaching toward the lens before vanishing into the blackness. Ethan's heart pounded. He could feel the presence even now, lingering in the water, patient, waiting for him to slip again. Every instinct told him this was no accident. He had been shown mercy briefly and spared something far worse. Climbing toward the surface, gasping for air, Ethan realized a chilling truth. Lake Superior wasn't just deep. Its secrets weren't meant to be explored. And some forces down there didn't just watch. They claimed time, consciousness, and anyone foolish enough to come too close. Those lost minutes would haunt him forever. Because what happened underwater was only the beginning. When Ethan finally emerged from the icy grip of Lake Superior, his body trembled uncontrollably, and his teeth chattered like castanets. Friends and fellow divers rushed to help, astonished that he had surfaced at all. His suit was torn in places, his gear scratched, and his camera was still recording the aftermath of his terrifying encounter. But it was his words that left them frozen. I don't know what it was, he stammered, voice shaking, eyes wide with lingering terror. Something tried to drag me deeper. I felt its hands, cold, strong, alive. I fought, I kicked, I swam. But it was trying to pull me down into the darkness, where no light reaches, where no one can hear you scream. He refused to dive again. Even the mention of the wreck, the lake, or exploration made him pale and silent. Friends tried to rationalize it, a hallucination, hypothermia, panic. But Ethan knew what he had felt, knew what he had seen. An intelligent, malevolent presence beneath the waves, waiting, patient, and impossibly strong. The footage on his camera remained chilling evidence. The dark figure gliding beneath him, reaching upward, and the brief, distorted frames of struggle that his mind could not recall. Lake Superior had tested him, and it had nearly claimed him. Ethan's confession became a cautionary tale among divers. The lake isn't just deep, it's ancient, and some depths hold more than history. Some depths hold things that pull, silently, patiently, and forever. Every autumn, the Kitchener region comes alive with pumpkin patches, hay rides, and corn mazes designed to thrill and entertain. Families and friends flock to the seasonal attractions, enjoying the crisp fall air and the playful thrill of navigating towering stalks under the fading sunlight. One Friday evening, a special night event drew thrill seekers into a popular corn maze. Torches lined the pathways, casting flickering shadows across the maze walls, while subtle sound effects created the illusion of rustling corn and distant whispers. For most, it was all harmless fun, a chance to test memory and courage under dim light. Among the visitors was a group of 4 teenagers: Alex, Maya, Liam, and Sophie. They laughed and joked as they entered the maze, cameras in hand to capture the adventure. The maze seemed endless, twisting paths that turned back on themselves, dead ends lined with hay bales, and dark corners that challenged even the sharpest eyes. But as night fully settled, the playful thrill began to fade. The wind picked up, rattling the stalks, and shadows seemed to move where no one was. The distant laughter of other groups grew faint, replaced by an eerie quiet that wrapped around the teenagers like a heavy blanket. And then, Sophie noticed her first clue that this night was not like any other. A girl, no older than 10, standing perfectly still among the corn stalks, her dark hair obscuring her face, watching them. At first, the group thought it was part of the maze's actors or props, a clever scare designed to startle. But the girl didn't move when they approached, didn't respond to their calls, and remained unnervingly still, as though waiting for something. The maze, once a source of laughter and challenge, began to twist into something far darker. For in the Kitchener cornfields, not all who wander are part of the game. And some observers aren't actors at all. As the group ventured deeper into the twisting paths of the corn maze, laughter and chatter faded behind them. The maze seemed alive now, each turn and dead end pressing them further into darkness. Then, faintly at first, Sophie heard it, a soft, muffled sound that made her pause. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. Alex strained his ears. At first, he thought it was wind rustling the cornstalks, or perhaps an animal hidden among the rows. But the sound persisted, growing louder, unmistakable. A child sobbing, high-pitched, pitiful, and utterly alone. The group froze. They were the only ones in this section of the maze. The other visitors' distant voices were gone. The crying seemed to come from deep within the labyrinth, somewhere the path shouldn't lead. Liam called out, "Hello, are you okay?" But the crying didn't stop or respond. Instead, it shifted. Closer now, weaving through the cornstalks as if following them, yet always just out of reach. Maya's voice trembled. "This isn't part of the maze, right?" None of them answered. The child's cries were raw and desperate, sending chills down their spines. Each step they took seemed to amplify the sound, echoing through the narrow corridors of corn, bouncing from wall to wall, growing heavier, more real. The maze, which had seemed harmless only moments ago, had transformed into something else entirely. The child's sobs were not a game, and the deeper they went, the clearer it became. Someone, or something, was watching, waiting, and luring them further into the shadows. The sobbing grew louder, guiding the group through a narrow corridor of corn that twisted in impossible angles. Then, suddenly, the sound stopped. A heavy, unsettling silence fell over the maze. From between the stalks, a figure emerged. A girl, no older than 10, pale as moonlight, with long braided hair hanging over her shoulders. Her clothes were worn and dirt-stained, and her wide, dark eyes seemed too knowing for a child her age. She stepped closer, her bare feet silent on the damp soil. "Please, help me," she whispered, her voice trembling yet strangely hollow, as if carried from far away. The teenagers instinctively stepped back, a mix of fear and sympathy freezing them in place. The girl's gaze followed them, unblinking, her expression a strange blend of sadness and expectation. She pointed deeper into the maze, as if urging them to follow, yet the paths behind them seemed to shift, closing off any escape. Sophie's heart pounded. We should get out of here," she stammered. But the girl didn't move, didn't blink, only watched, waiting, silent except for the faint echo of her plea. The air around them grew colder, the cornstalks rustling without wind. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, stretching toward the girl as though drawn to her. The maze itself seemed to lean in, directing the group toward paths they hadn't seen before, deeper into the darkness. It was no longer a game. The girl had appeared not to be rescued, but to lead them somewhere far more terrifying. Terrified, yet compelled. Liam stepped forward and reached out toward the pale girl, hoping to guide her, or at least make sure she was real. His fingers brushed her arm, and then she was gone. One moment she stood there, fragile and trembling, the next, nothing. No figure, no shadow, just the empty space between the cornstalks where she had been. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down on the group with sudden intensity. Before they could process what had happened, a chorus of screams erupted all around them. Dozens of voices, young and old, crying, shouting, and pleading, echoed through the maze. The sound was disorienting, coming from every direction at once. Cornstalks twisted and swayed, though there was no wind, and the familiar paths of the maze seemed to warp under their feet. Shaken and terrified, the group finally stumbled out of the maze as the first hints of dawn painted the sky. Their hands were scraped from the cornstalks, their clothes dirty and torn, and their minds reeling from what they had just experienced. Local authorities were called immediately. Security cameras covering the entrances, the surrounding fields, and even some internal points of the maze were reviewed in detail. But what the footage revealed, or rather, didn't reveal, was chilling. Not a single frame captured the girl. The pale child with braided hair, the one who had cried and pleaded for help, simply did not exist. The cameras showed only the 4 teenagers wandering the maze alone, moving through empty corridors of corn. No figure emerged from the stalks, no child's shadow, no trace of footsteps other than their own. Shaken and terrified, the group finally stumbled out of the maze as the first hints of dawn painted the sky. Their hands were scraped from the cornstalks, their clothes dirty and torn, and their minds reeling from what they had just experienced. Local authorities were called immediately. Security cameras covering the entrances, the surrounding fields, and even some internal points of the maze were reviewed in detail. But what the footage revealed, or rather, didn't reveal, was chilling. Not a single frame captured the girl. The pale child with braided hair, the one who had cried and pleaded for help, simply did not exist. The cameras showed only the four teenagers wandering the maze alone, moving through empty corridors of corn. No figure emerged from the stalks, no child's shadow, no trace of footsteps other than their own. Even the staff who had worked the night event insisted they saw nothing unusual. They hadn't received any reports of missing children, nor had anyone else witnessed anything resembling the girl the group described. But the teenagers knew the truth. They had seen her. They had followed her. And they had been led to the edge of panic, terror, and unexplainable horror. The maze had returned to normal by morning, peaceful, calm, and unsuspecting. Yet for those who had entered that night, the memory lingered. A reminder that some visitors to the corn maze aren't meant to be seen. And some disappearances are invisible to the world outside. On the outskirts of Sault Ste. Marie lies a dirt back road shrouded in legend. Locals rarely speak of it openly, but everyone knows to avoid it after dark. Tales passed down over decades, warn of strange lights, eerie sounds, and a presence that seems to follow travelers through the dense trees lining the road. Those who grew up in the area remember stories told by parents and grandparents. Cars stopping inexplicably, shadows appearing in headlights, and a feeling that the road itself was alive, watching and waiting. Some spoke of a figure glimpsed at the edge of the tree line, tall, black, featureless, moving silently yet always near. One elderly resident described it simply: "You don't drive that road at night unless you want to see something you'll never unsee." Despite the warnings, curiosity, or necessity, sometimes brings outsiders down the road. And those who return tell similar stories. Headlights catching a shape standing in the middle of the path, the sudden sensation of being followed, and the unshakable feeling that the trees themselves are closing in. For generations, the dirt road has remained a place of fear and caution. Even modern GPS maps mark it as a route to avoid at night. And the locals know, without saying a word, that the back road isn't dangerous in the usual sense. It's something else. Something patient, ancient, and waiting. Tonight, we begin to uncover the truth behind the back road entity of Sault Ste. Marie. A presence that lurks where the lights fade and the forest grows silent. It was just past midnight when Mark and his friend Eric decided to take the infamous back road. The headlights of their old sedan cut through the thick darkness, illuminating the narrow dirt path and the dense forest pressing in on both sides. At first, everything seemed ordinary, still, quiet, and deceptively peaceful. Then the headlights began to flicker. A sudden dimming, then a brief flare as if some unseen force was testing them. Mark tapped the dashboard nervously. "It's just the car. Old wiring," he muttered. But the unease had already settled in their chests. Moments later, the radio, once playing soft classic rock, went dead. Static filled the cabin for a heartbeat, then silence. No crackle, no hum, nothing. Just silence. And then it happened again. The headlights dimmed further, dropping the world around them into near-complete darkness. Trees loomed out of the shadows, like silent sentinels, their branches scratching against the windshield. Though no wind blew, Eric's voice trembled. "Mark, I don't like this." The car seemed to shudder under some invisible weight, and every instinct screamed at them to turn back. But when they tried, the road appeared endless, stretching unnaturally, twisting like the forest itself was reshaping to trap them. It wasn't a malfunction. Something on that back road was deliberately cutting off their sight, their connection to the outside world, leaving them vulnerable. The darkness was alive, and it wanted them to feel utterly alone. On that night, the back road of Sault Ste. Marie revealed its first warning. When the lights go out, you are no longer in control. The darkness pressed in on Mark and Eric as the headlights continued to flicker, the radio dead, leaving them enveloped in an unsettling silence. Then, a faint glow appeared ahead, hovering just above the dirt road. At first, they thought it was the reflection of their own headlights on the low-hanging mist. But as their eyes adjusted, the shape took form. A figure emerged from the fog, tall, vaguely human, yet indistinct. The edges of its body shimmered and blurred, as though the mist itself had twisted into a living silhouette. It moved slowly toward the car, each step silent, deliberate, and impossibly smooth. Mark gripped the steering wheel tightly, heart pounding. "Eric, do you see that?" he whispered. Eric's hands were frozen on the passenger seat. It's coming this way," he stammered, voice barely audible. The figure stopped for a moment, hovering just at the edge of the headlight's reach. No features were visible, just a pale, foggy outline with the unmistakable shape of a human body. Its presence exuded something unnatural, a chilling awareness, as if it knew their deepest fears. Then it started walking again, closing the distance between them and the car. The mist swirled unnaturally around it, occasionally drifting inside the vehicle through the open window, curling around the seats and dashboard, as if testing the boundaries of reality. Every instinct screamed at them to flee. Yet the road seemed to stretch endlessly, giving the impression that no matter how fast they moved, the figure would never stop approaching. That night, the back road wasn't just dark or quiet. It had taken shape, manifesting a presence that walked with purpose, silently, toward its prey. The human-shaped fog was no illusion, and it had chosen them. Panic gripped Mark and Eric as the foggy figure continued to advance, its featureless form gliding closer to the car. The headlights flickered violently, casting fragmented shadows across the dirt road, and the air inside the vehicle grew unbearably cold. Then, without warning, a hand, pale and semi-transparent, pressed against the driver's side window. Mark's breath caught in his throat. The glass instantly fogged with icy condensation, and the outline of the hand became clear. 5 fingers splayed, unnaturally long, leaving a distinct print that chilled him to the bone. He tried to roll up the window, but it resisted, moving only an inch before locking. The hand remained pressed against the glass, as if testing the barrier, its touch radiating a cold so intense it burned through the metal and glass, seeping into Mark's very bones. Eric recoiled in terror. "It's touching us. It's real." The figure's presence seemed to intensify with the touch, the mist swirling violently around the car, as if feeding on their fear. Every instinct screamed to drive, to escape. But the road outside remained impossibly long, twisting into darkness, with no end in sight. The handprint lingered, leaving a frost-like residue on the glass, a silent mark of the entity's power and intent. In that moment, it became painfully clear. This was no ordinary back road, no simple ghost story. The entity could reach in, touch, and invade the space of anyone foolish enough to travel its path at night. Mark realized they were no longer just observers. They were its target. Mark finally managed to slam his foot on the gas, the car lurching forward as the headlights sputtered back to life. The foggy figure faded into the darkness behind them, but the icy handprint remained on the window, a reminder that the encounter was far from over. They didn't speak on the drive back. Both men sat stiffly, eyes locked on the road ahead, terrified the figure might reappear in the rearview mirror. Even when they reached the safety of town, the cold still clung to them, sinking deep into their bones. Eric dropped Mark off at his house without saying a word. Mark stood there for a moment, staring at the frost-like handprint still etched onto the glass of his car door. He wiped it once. It didn't fade. He wiped it again. Still there. That night, Mark tried to sleep. But every few minutes, he heard something. Soft knocks on the window, the sound of slow footsteps moving across his lawn, and the distant whisper of moving fog. At first, he convinced himself it was his imagination, the leftover fear playing tricks on his mind. But then he saw it. Through the thin curtain of his bedroom window, a tall shape stood at the edge of his yard, motionless. Fog swirled around its legs, and the outline of a hand slowly lifted, like a greeting or a reminder. Mark didn't sleep at all. The next morning, when questioned by a friend who noticed how shaken he looked, Mark could only whisper one sentence, his voice trembling, eyes hollow with exhaustion. "It followed me home." And to this day, he refuses to drive that road again. Because some things on the back roads of Sault Ste. Marie don't stay behind. They follow. Thank you for staying with us through these 2 hours of chilling tales from Ontario. From remote forests and abandoned schools to dark back roads and haunted lakes, we've explored the stories that make the province more than just picturesque landscapes. They hide shadows, mysteries, and encounters that defy explanation. If you enjoyed this journey into fear, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel for more stories, and leave a comment sharing any strange or unexplained experiences you've had in Ontario. Your story might be featured in a future episode. Remember, these are not just legends or folklore. They are real accounts from real people who face the unknown. So, as you turn off the lights tonight and the quiet settles around you, keep one thing in mind. Good night, and stay out of the dark.